All right, folks. I would say that I hate to be one to cut off good conversation, but clearly I love to cut off good conversation. And I'll circle everyone back up so that we can get started on the book of Esther. All right, Esther chapter 1. We'll be going through the majority of chapter 2 as well today. And I want to put a disclaimer on this whole series is that every week we're going to be covering a lot of text. We're going to be reading the story. Every single word of it will be read together. However, unlike when we went through the book of James, not every word of the story will be analyzed in the sense of going through verse by verse and saying, let's understand each individual piece. This is a story. It's a narrative. And so we want to treat it as such. So we're going to be reading big chunks, making sure we understand what's happening, and then drawing our themes out of the book that God, the proper author, and the anonymous author who actually was the human author of Esther, the themes that they really expertly infused into this text. We're going to be looking at those things, applying those to our lives, and looking at them in a New Testament context as well. So that means get comfortable with reading a lot of Scripture, because we will be doing that. And with that in mind, for this series, I'm actually switching my translation of choice. I've been using the English Standard Version, the ESV, for most of our time together. For this series, and maybe this series only, we'll be using the New Living Translation. Now, the reason I chose that is because it is translated with the purpose of being very readable. So it's what's called more of a thought-for-thought translation instead of a word-for-word. Remember, the book of Esther, not written in English. It's translated, so every time that you translate, it's both art and science. ESV probably leans more on the science side of translating words so that you can go through and study it with better depth, piece by piece, because we're going more of a story approach. I thought a thought-by-thought translation would be helpful, something's a little more artful, easier for our ear to hear and understand, and it does a little bit of the interpretive work for us as well, because they've already made some decisions about the words that they use. So if you're like, man, I've always been able to follow along in my ESV Bible here, and all of a sudden I don't understand why it's so different. That's why. This is the New Living Translation. The series title, the overarching theme of the whole book of Esther, which I've stolen for our title, is For a Time Such as This. The most iconic verse from the book of Esther, it comes later in the story from chapter 4. When we get there, we'll spend our time on it, but the idea is that God works things in His timing so that when you come to a moment, any moment for that matter, you can always say, what happened before happened for such a time as this. The guiding principle of the book of Esther, the guiding principle for Jesus going to the cross in the fullness of time, and then the guiding principle as well for our lives as God continues to be sovereignly in control. I'll introduce you guys briefly to the themes that we'll be going through each week, just so you can get a big view, and then we'll zoom in on our theme for this week. I know it's a lot of pre-work today, but hey, you're starting a new book of the Bible, right? So what we'll be going over today is the God who works through broken systems. Next week, it'll be the God who works through evil people. The week after that, risking the palace to save the people. After that, elevating the humble and humbling the elevated. And then lastly, the visible work of the invisible God. Something I want you guys to know, even though it's coming from the last theme that we'll be discussing, is that Esther is one of the only books in the whole Bible not to mention God The name God does not appear. The name Abraham does not appear. There's no talk about sacrifices or worship or anything like that. It's an intensely secular book in that way. And that's what we'll get into more on the visible work of the invisible God. But this is a conscious choice by the author. There's plenty of moments where the most natural way to write a scene is to talk about God. For example, there's a scene where one of the characters, who's a Jew, gets into an intense mourning. And to talk about sackcloth and ashes and mourning absent of God makes no sense. For a Jew to be mourning and not talk about God, which shows us a very intentional choice by the author, which ought to clue us into the fact that we're reading a book written by an expert author, both human author and divine author in God. So we want to be approaching the text in that way. This is not written to be a historical book in the same way that like 1st and 2nd Chronicles is a historical book, or even Ezra Nehemiah written as a historical book, where there is an abundance of people names, place names, event names, dates, those sorts of things that are meant to situate your mind into the historical moment as the most important communication tool. Esther, while it is very much actual, real, and historical event, you can tell it's not the author's point to be writing you a historical book. He's writing you a literary book that uses themes, that uses language, that uses characters, that uses nuance. So we're going to read it as such. We're going to do our very best. However, although it is not a book written for historical purposes, it is a book written in a historical moment. So we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to place this book in its historical context. If you guys haven't found them already, there's handouts on your table that have a lot of scriptures on them. That was my way of saying it's going to take forever to navigate all through over this thing. Why don't I just give you a piece of paper to look at it all for yourself here? So this is going to help us place Esther in the history of the Bible here. So, in 720 BC, northern Israel falls to the nation of Assyria. Remember, Israel at this point, this is what starts the exile. Israel has split into two countries, northern Israel and Judah. So, northern Israel falls first. They were the far more sinful nation. They were the nation that also did not carry on the lineage of David in their kings. So northern Israel falls first under wicked kings. You can see here in 2 Kings 17, 5-6, it says, "Then the king of Assyria invaded the entire land, and for 3 years he besieged the city of Samaria, which was the capital of northern Israel. Finally, in the 9th year of King Hoshea's reign, Samaria fell, and the people of Israel were exiled to Assyria. They were settled in colonies in Hala, along the banks of the harbor river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes." So, northern Israel, conquered by Assyria, scattered throughout the Assyrian Empire nation at this point. Then what happens off screen is Assyria then falls to the nation of Babylon. And Michael talked about this when he preached last week from the book of Habakkuk, that God had put this in motion, that the Chaldeans, later known as the Babylonians, would be raised up for the purpose of enacting judgment upon God's people, both northern Israel and then Judah, which is what happens in a lot of places actually it's recorded, but we're going to look at where it's recorded in Daniel 1, where Judah falls to Babylon. Daniel 1, 1-2. "During the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. So Nebuchadnezzar took him back to the land of Babylonia and placed him in the treasure house of his God." Then, if you were to continue reading through the book of Daniel, which obviously you should, it's a wonderful book, what comes is in Daniel 5, Babylon falls to another nation, Persia. It says this is right after the very iconic scene where a hand appears in the room and quite literally the handwriting is on the wall and nobody understands what it means. And so who do you call when you don't understand what something means? You call Daniel, because that's kind of what he's in the business of doing. Daniel comes in and he gives this statement. It says Daniel 5, 26 through 31. This is what these words mean. Mene means numbered. God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end. He's speaking to the current king of Babylon, the son of King Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 27, Tekel means weighed. You have been weighed on the balances and you have not measured up. Parsin means divided. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then at Belshazzar's command, which is Belshazzar is the current king of Babylon, Daniel was dressed in purple robes, a gold chain was hung around his neck. He was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. And that very night, Belshazzar, the Babylonian king, was killed. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Darius was one of the kings of what you would call the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medes and the Persians come over and they overthrow the great Babylonian nation, which also, again, if you read the book of Daniel, coincides with a dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had that had to do with a statue and nations that would come after nations. It's really beautiful how God uses prophecy in this time through secular people in secular moments to speak a sacred message to show God has never stopped being in control of the events of human history. Fast forward just a tiny bit to Ezra 1 through 4. This happens very, very shortly after, within the year of the Persians taking over Babylon. So Ezra 1 through 4, in the first year, I guess I have years for all this stuff if you want to know them. It was in 538 BC is when Darius the Mede / also Cyrus the Great, who are both kings in Persia at this point, they decree that the Jews can return home. The first year of King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord fulfilled the prophecy he had given through Jeremiah. He stirred the heart of Cyrus to put this proclamation in writing and to send it throughout his kingdom. This is what King Cyrus of Persia says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. He has appointed me to build him a temple at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Any of you who are his people may go to Jerusalem and Judah to rebuild the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, who lives in Jerusalem, and may your God be with you. Whether this Jewish remnant is found, let their neighbors contribute towards their expenses by giving them silver and gold, supplies for the journey and livestock, as well as a voluntary offering for the temple of God in Jerusalem. And while this is not a series from the book of Ezra, we can just take one moment to see a couple of really neat things that go back to the Exodus, because apparently what doesn't go back to the Exodus? This moment of a foreign ruler saying, send the Israelites away from us and sponsor their trip. Give them money as they're leaving. It's exactly what we saw in the book of Exodus as they're getting ready to flee Egypt. Now, though, it's a far more willing participant in Cyrus the Great than you had in Pharaoh in Egypt. A beaten down man in Pharaoh, a very benevolent, convicted man even in Cyrus the Great, who God has intervened with and spoken to. And I mean, you can just even hear it in these couple of verses, is very moved by what God has impressed upon him, to release them to go do this good work. And so that does happen. And shortly thereafter, within the year, Zerubbabel, which is actually the grandson of King Jehoiakim, who we just read about a couple of passages ago. This is the line of David. We're keeping the David kingship here. Zerubbabel leads the Jews back to Israel. Let's look at Ezra 2, 1 through 2. Here is the list of the Jewish exiles in the provinces who returned from their captivity. King Nebuchadnezzar had deported them to Babylon, but now they returned to Jerusalem and the other towns in Judah where they had originally lived. Their leaders were Zerubbabel, Jeshua, Nehemiah, Seraiah, Reelaiah, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mispar, Bigvai, Rehum, and Baana. Thank you. For those of you guys who do know the story of Esther, you see the name Mordecai, and that comes jumping off the page. Almost definitely not the same Mordecai. The timelines very much do not align for this to be Mordecai, Esther's elder cousin who takes care of her. Just apparently a semi-common name at that point. And so they do. They go and the Jews begin to rebuild the temple. You can see they've laid the foundation. They build an altar in Ezra 3, 1-3, which says, in early autumn, when the Israelites had settled in their towns, all the people assembled in Jerusalem with a unified purpose. Then Jeshua, son of Jehozadak, and joined by his fellow priests, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, with his family in rebuilding the altar of the God of Israel. They wanted to sacrifice burnt offerings on it, as instructed by the law of Moses, the man of God. Even though the people were afraid of the local residents, they rebuilt the altar at its old site. Then they began to sacrifice burnt offerings on the altar of the Lord each morning and evening. And Jeshua is a descendant of Aaron, a rightful priest, a Levite of Levites. So you've got the seed of David in Zerubbabel leading the people back to the promised land, and you've got the seed of Aaron who is reinstating the proper worship of God among his people, literally laying the foundation and figuratively laying the foundation for the people of Israel to come out of their exile in a certain sense, returning home. And then the last thing that we'll read, because it's the last major event that happens before our story in Esther, comes from Ezra 6, 14-15, when the temple is completed. So the Jewish elders considered their work, and they were greatly encouraged by the preaching of the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, the very same who write the books of Haggai and Zechariah, son of Iddo. The temple was finally finished, as had been commanded by God of Israel, and decreed by Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes, kings of Persia. The temple was completed on, that's handy, March 12th, during the 6th year of King Darius's reign. If you ever wanted to see the most NLT thing ever, it's putting a date like March 12th in there, because you know that wasn't in the Hebrew text, March 12th. But they've done the math for us on that, so congrats. So you can see a few things here in going through what I know is a lot of scripture before we get into a lot of scripture. One, you can see the historical moment that Esther happens in. This is at a time when overall, it's pretty good to be a Jew compared to when you were in Babylon. Because there is the most hope ever, I won't say ever, the most hope for the people of Israel since Assyria and Babylon came to town. You've got Zerubbabel, who is this seed of David, who's bringing the people back, who is a leader among leaders. And what thought do you think is coming to mind as they're looking at this seed of David who has made the enemies of Israel his footstool? Zerubbabel's the Messiah, baby. Our waiting is over. Man, that was a long time. It was, a few hundred years, but man, we're good. Little did they know they had a lot more waiting to do. But you can see the amount of hopefulness here. Obviously, what happens after this is the book of Nehemiah, where the walls of Israel now are being built. So not only do you have a temple, but now you have a city that is rebuilt. And so hopefulness, all-time high, much greater benefactor in the governmental system with Cyrus, and even Darius plays a big role when you look at the story of Daniel. However, during all of this, there is a cultural undertone. One of the hallmarks of the Persian Empire was that they really prided themselves on being religiously inclusive, which sounds very weird for an ancient culture, but they would simultaneously hold many religious beliefs and actually viewed exclusivity of worshiping only one God to be a sign of massive disrespect to all of the other gods. And so you see this undercurrent come out. One really famous spot in Daniel in the lion's den, where Daniel has, this is during the Persian reign, Daniel has once again moved himself up the ranks of the governmental system, and now all of these Persians who are looking at him saying, man, Daniel keeps jumping the line. We ought to get him in trouble. What do we do? And they eyeball him, they said, well, there's really only one thing we could get him on. He sure does like worshiping Yahweh a lot. What if we make it illegal to do that? And so they do, gets thrown in a lion's den. Daniel's fine. Darius is quite moved by the whole experience. Those Persians who pointed the finger now are in the lion's den. Lion's not so tame anymore. This undercurrent of, I don't know if it's quite right to call it racism, because I think that carries a certain connotation, but it's certainly not racism, because to be Jewish and to be a Yahweh worshiper were one and the same. And so to go against the Jews for worshiping Yahweh was to go against a people group. And so there is racism in that, but probably not of the exact same kind of what we think of as Americans when racism comes up. The next best story to illustrate the undercurrents of this anti-Yahweh worship sentiment, this anti-monotheism, this one God thing, is the book of Esther, which we're just might get into here in a second. While it looks like a very hopeful setting overall, there is still a danger to being a Jew in Persia. And we see that on full display in the book of Esther. For those of you who are familiar with the story of Esther, I'd like to get you guys' preliminary thoughts and impressions, I guess would be the better sense, your preliminary impressions on what you think of when you think of Queen Esther, the person of Esther, not necessarily the book of Esther. So, room question. What's your impression of Esther?
Brave woman.
Brave woman, absolutely. Stubborn. Beautiful, absolutely.
Respectful of her caregiver
Yeah.
or your husband, yeah.
Yeah, respectful is definitely a big part of her identity, absolutely. What else?
Way smarter than the orphan daughter of unknown aliens has any business being.
Yeah,
She knows it, and nobody else but Mordecai does.
yeah, absolutely.
Way smarter than everyone else thinks she is.
So
Yeah.
humble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Humble, is that what you said? That's exactly the word that was on my mind. Well, I think humble is definitely one of her defining characteristics several times. We'll see it at least once in our passage today, absolutely.
Saving her people.
Yeah, she does have, you almost hesitate to use the word savior, but she is. She is a pre-Jesus, just like there are so many other Old Testament figures in particular who are meant to point us to the ultimate version in Jesus. But yes, she is very much a prototype of Jesus, the one who rises up to save her people. No question. Other impressions? I can't help but notice anti-feminist harlot didn't come up in the description, but it's also not entirely wrong either. That has been actually a big pushback of modern readers, hilariously, on both sides of the spectrum. For those who are ultra-conservative, they say, she is a harlot. And for those who are ultra-liberal, they say, she is absolutely flying in the face of all of our strong, independent woman narratives that we've had, because she's wildly, we use the word humble in the positive sense, trod upon would maybe be the more negative way to say that. She's a doormat until she's not. But even then, she stands up for her people at the poking and prodding of her patriarchal figure. So people on both sides find Esther intensely problematic as an individual. Yes, Michael?
I think that the thing that will make Esther fly off the page for us more than anything else is to remember that the citadel of Susa is the most dangerous place in the world.
Yeah.
It is. Imagine House of Cards on steroids.
Yeah.
Washington, D.C. has never been a tenth as dangerous. New York City, the most dangerous place you can think of on earth today, is not a tenth as dangerous as the citadel of Susa. People were murdering each other all the time.
Yeah.
The king of Persia was typically the last person who couldn't be murdered. They literally murdered each other until one of them was left.
Yeah. So, timely House of Cards reference. Is that Kevin Spacey? Is that Kevin Spacey pay you for that plug of House of Cards? No, that's good. He's exactly right. I mean, you have to think of the climate in which they're in, intensely volatile as most empires are, feudalistic, where there's a lot at stake, there's a lot of death, there's a lot of consequence, there's a lot of weight, and the power is held by a very, very small group and sometimes even an individual on decision making. So you are in a powder keg. So you guys hit a lot of the character traits that we will continue to see and explore in the person of Esther as we read the book of Esther. But just know the Bible study version of Esther, the Beth Moore Esther, the women's conference Esther is not always the fullest picture of Esther. She is and should be held up as one of the most epically faithful individuals in the Bible, and add to that, most faithful women in the Bible. She should get her time in the sun for who she is and what she's done. But she is not what she went through to get there. We whitewash a lot when we do studies of Esther. And I want us to go into this knowing this is a dirty business in which this book takes place, which is why today we're talking about a God who works in the midst of evil systems, broken systems. So I don't think I can tease it any further. We're going to have to start the book of Esther now. So bear with me, please. If you have a copy of God's word, open it up. If not, look up here as I scroll along as we read Esther 1:1 through 2:20. If your Bible says King Ahasuerus, just know that's the same as King Xerxes. NLT simplified it for us by using one name for the one individual who shows up later in different texts, so that you can know it's the same person. Very common for people to have multiple names, including Esther, which we'll see in a second as multiple names. But just know if yours has a different name for the king, it is the same person. These events happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. At that time, Xerxes ruled his empire from his royal throne on the fortress of Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of the nobles and officials. He invited all the military officers of Persia and Media as well as all the princes and nobles of the provinces. The celebration lasted 180 days. I say that again, half a year. A tremendous display of the opulent wealth of his empire and the pomp and splendor of his majesty. When it was all over, the king gave a banquet for all the people, and from the greatest to the least, who were in the fortress of Susa. It lasted for 7 days and was held in the courtyard of the palace garden. The courtyard was beautifully decorated with white cotton curtains and blue hangings, which were fastened with the white linen cord and purple ribbons to hang silver rings embedded in marble pillars. Gold and silver couches stood on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Drinks were served in gold goblets of many designs, and there was an abundance of royal wine reflecting the king's generosity. By edict of the king, no limits were placed on the drinking, for the king had instructed all his palace officials to serve each man as much as he wanted. I used to wait tables at a place that served alcohol. We were not told the same thing. At the same time, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the 7th day of the feast, only the 7th day of the 180-day feast, when King Xerxes was in high spirits because of the wine, drunk as a skunk. Yes.
So this is after the 180 days.
Oh, excuse me.
This is the 7 days where the commoners are in the palace.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Yes, thank you. So on the 7th day of the feast, when King Xerxes was in high spirits because of the wine, he told the 7 eunuchs who attended him, Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, rough name, to bring Queen Vashti to him with the royal crown on her head. He wanted the nobles and all the other men to gaze on her beauty, for she was a very beautiful woman. But when they conveyed the king's order to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. And this made the king furious, and he burned with anger. He immediately consulted with his wise advisors who knew all the Persian laws and customs, for he had always asked their advice. The names of these men were Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Merez, Marsina, and Memucan, 7 nobles of Persia and Media. They met with the king regularly and held the highest positions in the empire. What must be done to Queen Vashti, the king demanded. What penalty does the law provide for a queen who refuses to obey the king's orders, properly sent through his eunuchs? Memucan answered the king and his nobles. Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also every noble and citizen throughout your empire. Women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn that Queen Vashti has refused to appear before the king. Before this day is out, the wives of all the king's nobles throughout Persia and Media will hear what the queen did and will start treating their husbands the same way. There will be no end to their contempt and anger. So if it pleases the king, we suggest that you issue a written decree, a law of the Persians and Medes that cannot be revoked. It should order that Queen Vashti be forever banished from the presence of King Xerxes, and that the king should choose another queen more worthy than she. When the decree is published throughout the king's vast empire, husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will receive proper respect from their wives. The king and his nobles thought this made good sense, so he followed Memucan's counsel. He sent letters to all parts of the empire, to each province in its own script and language, proclaiming that every man should be the ruler of his own home and should say whatever he pleases. But after Xerxes' anger had subsided, this is now chapter 2, he began thinking about Vashti and what she had done and the decree he had made. So his personal attendants suggested, "Let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint agents in each province to bring these beautiful young women into the royal harem at the fortress of Susa. Hegai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem, will see that they are all given beauty treatments. After that, the young woman who most pleases the king will be made queen instead of Vashti." This advice was very appealing to the king. Barbara? Surprise? Yeah. This advice was very appealing to the king, so he put the plan into effect.
The bachelor.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. So I'd like to give you this rose. Absolutely. At that time, there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair. He was from the tribe of Benjamin and was a descendant of Kish and Shimi. His family had been among those who, with King Jehoiachin, which is the same as King Jehoiakim, if I remember correctly, of Judah, had been exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. This man had a very beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadassah, who was also called Esther. When her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. As a result of the king's decree, Esther, along with many other young women, was brought to the king's harem at the fortress of Susa and placed in Hegai's care. Hegai was very impressed with Esther and treated her kindly. He quickly ordered a special menu for her and provided her with beauty treatments. He also assigned her 7 maids specially chosen from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. Esther had not told anyone of her nationality and family background because Mordecai had directed her not to do so. Every day, Mordecai would take a walk near the courtyard of the harem to find out about Esther and what was happening to her. Before each young woman was taken to the king's bed, she was given the prescribed 12 months of beauty treatments, 6 months with oil of myrrh, followed by 6 months with special perfumes and ointments. And yes, when it says taken to the king's bed, it is exactly what you think. When it was time for her to go to the king's palace, she was given her choice of whatever clothing or jewelry she wanted to take from the harem. That evening, she was taken to the king's private rooms. And the next morning, she was brought to the second harem, where the king's wives lived. There, she would be under the care of Shaashgaz, the king's eunuch in charge of the concubines. She would never go to the king again unless he had especially enjoyed her and requested her by name. Esther was the daughter of Abihail, who was Mordecai's uncle. Mordecai had adopted his younger cousin Esther. When it was Esther's turn to go to the king, she accepted the advice of Hegai, the eunuch in charge of the harem. She asked for nothing except what he suggested, and she was admired by everyone who saw her. Esther was taken to King Xerxes at the royal palace in early winter of the 7th year of his reign, and the king loved Esther more than any of the other young women. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her queen instead of Vashti. To celebrate the occasion, he gave a great banquet in Esther's honor for all his nobles and officials, declaring a public holiday for the provinces and giving generous gifts to everyone. Even after all the young women had been transferred to the second harem and Mordecai had become a palace official, Esther continued to keep her family background and nationality a secret. She was still following Mordecai's directions, just as she did when she lived in his home. Like I said, a lot of text, a lot of story. And so what I want you guys to do at your tables to make sure that you are understanding and internalizing what we're going through is there's strips of paper that I've expertly used my perfect handwriting to write on some of the story points from what we've just read. We're going to have a bit of a race between the two tables to see who can get the timeline put together fastest on what we just read. So
You guys have no.
get your slips of paper ready, on your mark, get set, go. Okay, I want to hear what order you guys have it in. Because you guys finished first, you guys get to share your order.
King Xerxes throws a party to celebrate his
Wealth.
Queen
Second grader
Vashti
handwriting.
refuses to appear while the king summons he.
Her, it's clear. Oh, did it get cut off on you? Oh, there's a chance.
The king banishes
It is at the edge of my paper.
passes a law that men will be respected and obeyed in their homes. King
Yep.
Xerxes regrets his decision. The royal court assembles beautiful women to audition to be the next queen. King Esther keeps her nationality a secret. Esther is chosen as one of the women for the king's harem. Esther and the other women receive 1 year of beauty treatments. The king selects Esther to be queen. The new queen is celebrated.
Okay, same thing over here? Yes or no?
No.
No, we switched to where like Esther keeps her nationality.
Okay, where'd you guys put that?
We put it after she's chosen for one of the women from the king's thing.
That's where I have it too.
And I'm
Boom roasted,
but because it's a continuous thing. Like
Yes, yes.
keep it a secret, and
Yeah.
she continued to keep it a secret.
See, I
I
thought
get that.
I went where it appeared in the text to the best of my ability.
that's what I was.
If you can make a text-based argument, I'll give you a retroactive point that's worth just as little as their point is, but
Okay, so describe what the queen's position actually was during this time, like, because apparently he had a bunch of women already in there.
Yeah.
concubines. So what was the purpose of, why did he regret what he did? Was it because she was so beautiful that she now is not welcomed?
sure.
He misses that, all due to what happens in the bedroom. Is that the main reason he regretted it? What was the purpose of that? If he's got all these other women.
Sure. So you can hear he's got wives for days, women for days, beyond wives as well. So what is the significance of this position of queen? There can only be one queen, the one by whom the heir comes through. That the next king of Persia will come through the line of the queen. Because the king is obviously with many women at this point and siring who knows how many kids, but that it would come through the queen. So obviously that's of great significance, especially in an honor and shame culture, the honor that comes from from having your son become the queen, the position, the fact that you will be well cared for throughout that, all of that stuff would be the benefit of being queen. As far as the regret goes, I think it could go in a variety of different directions to speculate as to why he regrets sending Vashti away. Whether there's a certain, the things you mentioned, the beauty, the bedroom, those sorts of things. If it's even just the fact of, oh man, now I have to roll the dice on another queen. Like I knew what I had in Vashti, but yeah, yes, Michael.
The other thing the queen did is she was in charge of all of those other women.
Yeah,
So she ruled all the women. And I imagine that when somebody with Vashti's capability was exiled, probably that side of the house got out of control.
sure.
And
The eunuchs were begging for support. Yeah,
while all of the princes were like, "Great, we've maintained order. It's better to live on the corner of a roof than with a troublesome woman."
sure. And
It's
it's,
going to promote from within.
yeah, right. Well, I think that would have been troublesome all on its own, which is probably why you start the national search. So I think the reason that he wakes up the next morning regretful is more of a statement on the state he was in the night he made the decision. Not in his full control. He was inebriated. He was also coerced by his advisors and whatnot to make a rash decision. Obviously, it falls on him for putting himself in that position, for surrounding himself with those people, all that stuff. But yes, I think that's what the regret is meant to point us to, more than to point us back at Vashti, is to point us back at last night Xerxes and the decisions that he made. So,
I think considering the times and some of the stories that I've heard, it seems pretty benign of him. Didn't cut her head off.
sure, yeah. Yeah, although I don't know exactly how banishment from an empire of that size looks. I mean,
Just his presence. So
Oh,
she's out of the
okay.
citadel.
Okay.
Probably go wherever she came from.
sure.
The thing that makes it so crass is he was not asking the queen to come to the court with my friends.
Right.
He was ordering the queen to come appear in front of the common people.
Yeah.
That's the thing that really set her off. Like, no, I'm in the middle of my own feast. I got
Right.
700 of your wives over here. I'm trying to keep order. And now you want me to come play with the dirty plebeians.
Yeah.
That's what she was like, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. The entire scene that unfolds before us is so foreign to us in so many ways, right? The idea of the king banishing the queen in his drunken fit, for her not being willing to parade herself among the commoners, the response of his wise counsel to make an unrestricted patriarchy law in every household in the empire, the compulsion of young women to join the harem of the king, all of the pageantry that takes place after that, and essentially the condemnation that comes to all of the other women who were not Esther. Because you have to think about what were the other options of what would happen. You come to be evaluated, like you're pulled from your home, right? And now you're being evaluated and you end up either in harem number 1, which is the group that the king did not care for and would never see him, would never be loved, and also would never be allowed to marry. So they would just be permanent maidens in that sense, as far as, or old maids, I guess, or just the unmarried group would be deprived and robbed of their future. Then group number 2, apparently a slight step above, got enough favor from the king to where now they're in harem number, I guess, 2, they got promoted to level 2, which occasionally gets to see the king, occasionally gets to be with him, which,
Joy.
yeah, I don't know that that's a step up. You end up maybe marginally less lonely, probably better cared for based on what we see Esther go through as she goes into the second harem, but honestly still not a great life except for the fact that you're fed and you're clothed and you're housed. So you will never be in poverty, but you will always be in a type of isolation, even if you're surrounded by the other members of the harem and the eunuchs and that sort of thing. And then the third outcome is the only room for one, which is Esther. And we saw what happened to the last queen. So, I mean, there is just an abomination of things that happen throughout this story and in this culture. And the brokenness of the systems of this empire that allow this to happen, it's atrocious. And we find ourselves saying, like, wow, my goodness, I'm sure glad I don't live in a culture like this. And yet, the scene is, yeah, Mark.
I'm thinking that these guys that gave him the advice probably had some problems at home.
There's absolutely a chance, and that they were coming in with selfish motivations as well. I think there's a chance.
They wanted to better their
Yeah.
status.
Well, I think the whole story is categorized by selfishness, I think, of all brands and kinds. Now, while it is very foreign to us, the story is also not that foreign to us in our experience, because when you break the scene down, what does it actually boil down into? Glorification of material wealth. You've got all the pomp and circumstance of a 180-day feast. The objectification of women. You've got the abuse of governmental power. You've got sexual exploitation. You've got, if you want to put it in there as well, these kind of racial identity issues here as well. Are any of those things not hot button issues in 21st century America? Every single one of those.
We have a good word for for bringing women into the first harem. It's called trafficking.
Yeah. This one's just government sanctioned,
Yeah.
right? This one's got a budget.
Publicly government section.
Publicly, yeah. So you have issues that are common to us as well. Can we honestly look at our systems, like foster care system, public education, food stamps, Hollywood, corporate America, Silicon Valley, and even, to get a little close to home, the American church, and say to ourselves with confidence that we are not in the midst of the same type of systemic evil and brokenness that was in the Persian Empire? I can't say it with confidence. It may not be of the exact same kind. It may not be of the exact same, I liked brashness, even crassness, but it just means we're hiding it. It just means it's got a little bit better coat of paint on it. It might just be that we've been conditioned to be more okay with it. It's our culture. We can judge another culture how we want, but I don't think that this story and the themes of this story are that far away from us. So Esther is a book for the people of God to read when they look around and they find themselves in a land that is, one, not their home, and two, filled with brokenness on every side, which means it's a book for us. What does God expect us to do when we're in a broken nation that is not our home? Well, the response of Christians in America historically has been to separate ourselves, to put up a wall between the brokenness and the evil and ourselves, because we want to be distinctive. Whether it's the satanic panic, whether it's purity culture, whether it's Christian cancel culture, whatever you want to put on it as the brand of the decade, that's what we've historically done, is said, keep your gross brokenness over there, and we're going to keep our churchiness over here. Is that what Esther does? No. In a big way, no.
She grabs Satan by both horns.
Yeah. Does she stand in opposition to the system and separate herself from the status quo? Like, not really. What she does is, we even talked about it. I mean, she listens and obeys and goes with the flow and finds herself Queen of Persia.
Good for her.
Good for her, right? Even to the point of violating some pretty cut and dry laws in the Torah. I said a little tongue-in-cheek earlier, the anti-feminist harlot, but you could easily make that case. She bedded with a man she was not married to. Did she have a choice? Death? Yeah. But for such a time as this, our core theme, if she had chosen death, which would have been a morally justified choice according to the law, she would have been right in doing so, of taking a stand like Daniel, right? Who says, no, we will not do that. So yes, clearly there's a time to stand. Esther takes her stand later, when she has been positioned rightly by God to do that. She takes a stand for her people. So, for such a time as this. But that's just Esther. We don't want to forget and we don't want to make the mistake, especially of Old Testament characters, of saying everything they do, we should give the stamp of approval because Samson's a bad dude, and he was the judge over Israel. We should not model our lives after Samson. Well, who we should model our lives after is Jesus. So, as we talked about, Esther being a prototype for Jesus, how does Jesus engage a nation that is not his home, that has broken systems? One of the most broken systems of first century Israel was the Jewish law. He comes into a culture where the Pharisees and the Sadducees have taken the perfect law of God and contorted it to where it's almost unrecognizable, to where it used to be laws in place to protect the vulnerable from the powerful, now exist only to serve the powerful and to take advantage of the vulnerable. And what does Jesus do? Jesus comes into that and he fulfills the law. He engages with Pharisees, not just in a battle, although he does that too, and he pushes and challenges, but he shares meals with them. He lets Nicodemus come to his house in the middle of the night, and he chats with them about being born again. Not only with these corrupt religious leaders, but also the tax collectors. Talk about a broken, corrupt system. Remember, tax collectors were Israelites, Jews, who had said, yeah, I'll sign a contract with the oppressive government that's over us to go take money from all my countrymen, and I'm probably going to take a little bit extra for myself along the way so I can go pay the man who's oppressing us and keeping us down. And what does Jesus do with them? Does he go spit in their face and say, you are against the people of God and have been hurting them? No, he loves them. And in fact, the gospel writer Matthew, tax collector, one of the apostles. And then add to the list on top of that, we talked about sexual exploitation. What does Jesus do with prostitutes? Not what most people do with prostitutes. He has meals. He sits with them. He humanizes them.
He talks with them?
Yeah, he shares about the kingdom of God with them, the good news of the gospel. Same thing with lepers, isolated from society. And then finally, if you want to look at how Jesus ultimately uses a corrupt system for the purposes of the redemptive work of God, look no further than the judicial system of ancient Israel, where Jesus, being in full control the whole time, if you doubt that, go read the story again. He tells Judas to go, turn him in. He says, it's probably about that time, Judas, you ought to hit the road. And so what happens is a trumped up trial in the middle of the night by the Jewish leaders, who then take him in the dead of night to the Roman leaders, who then try to get him out of the charges that they know are trumped up, and Pontius Pilate trying to get him off, offering Barabbas. And ultimately, it's the voice of the people stirred into a frenzy that decide the fate like a totally blind jury where Jesus goes. And for such a time as this, Jesus goes to the cross and he dies. A death he didn't deserve for a crime that was not deserving of death. Also not actually blasphemy because he was God. But for such a time as this, Jesus engages broken systems to use them for redemptive purposes. Jesus did not separate himself from brokenness in order to look different from the world. Instead, he embraced those who are broken
And heal them.
and he healed them. He made them look different by being with them. He didn't separate himself to look different. He went in and made them different. It brought about a church in the first century comprised of some of the most honorable people of the day and some of the most untouchable people of the day. And that's the church of God. That's the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That it is for the highest of the high in society and the lowest of the low. It's the same hope. So when we are faced with broken systems in our world, what are we meant to do? Do we build our ivory tower and we look down on them and say, holier than thou, and thou, and thou, and thou? Or do we engage it with the gospel?
Gospel.
Dead on. Why are we partnered with DHS as a church? Is it because we're really fans of how they go about their business and how they're structured? I'll tell you firsthand, with a camera in the room, I'm not. I'm on record with the people at DHS making personal statements that I'm not happy with the way the DHS is run. Why are we still full-throatedly, vocally partnered with them as a church? It's because we believe that the hope of Jesus Christ needs to be in the child welfare system. Those people, those children, those families, those caseworkers, they need the love of Jesus despite how broken they are and how evil some of the things that they've done or let happen.
Like Lane.
What that tells us is that those people need Jesus. Think about the public school system. How easy is it for us to sit here and say, man, public school system is really going down the tubes, you know. Who knows what they're going to start teaching next in there? It's just check out the new curriculum. What are they going to do? These teachers, man, they are just fill in whatever blank you want. Why is Alyssa still a public school teacher? Ask her. Is it because she's had a really good time in public school? No, she's had a couple of jaw surgeries that'll tell you she's had a horrible time in public school. Why does she keep going back? It's because we need the gospel of Jesus Christ for these kids and these teachers and administrators. The calling of the Christian is not to go hide when we face a broken system. It is to take light into darkness, because the darkness will not overcome it. Even if it's hard, even if it's dangerous, even if it's scary, even if you're Esther risking her life. The really scary, huh?
She's a better man than I am.
I hope not. Because it's the call on every person in this room. And you want to know the scariest one and the most relevant one for our church? The question of not why do we partner at DHS or why do we partner with public schools or any other fill in the blank. Why do we partner with other churches? You want to know what some of the greatest agents of hurt in our nation, state, and even town, city has been? It's been the American church. The bride of Christ has gone in and inflicted pain and damage onto individuals in meaningful, documented ways. There are several offender lists out there with names of people on church staffs who worked in church nurseries, who worked in whatever you want to fill in the blank, you can find it. And so wouldn't it be easier for Mark's shirt to just say magnify and not magnify church? Wouldn't it be easier for us to say, I don't know, man, this whole church thing, we're just going to do our own thing over here. We're just going to do the magnify thing, keep our heads down, and just keep it between us and Jesus. Most of us are acquainted with church hurt, either first or secondhand. And yet we keep coming back to church. Why is that? It's because the church is the bride of Christ. And if you look around and you say, yeah, but the American church looks nothing like the bride of Christ that was talked about in the New Testament. Looks nothing like those churches started in first century Judea. I say, you're right. It's a broken system. And what do the people of God do to broken systems? They do not go run and hide. They go run and shine.